Okay, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you're watching us, from the comfort of your homes or whichever else places, make sure that you are comfortable enjoying the sessions out there. There is a trio waiting backstage because it's time for a fireside chat, not literally though. So the investment code, financial governance, M&A for accelerating digital transformation is what we're going to talk about. Now, this session will help CFOs rethink their investment governance frameworks to catalyze the initiatives that efficiently differentiate their companies. Now, if this is something what you were looking up to, this is the session for you, by you, of you. All right, make sure those tweets are coming in using our official hashtag, that's hashtag ETDataCon. And did I miss telling you that this session will also address the evolving practices in deal structuring, success metrics, and integration in the acquisitions? Now, okay, that's a new thing versus traditional M&A in the face of CFOs who are seeking to use that balance sheet capital to put digitalization on steroids. Now that's eye-catching. All right, so with that vibe of excitement, I'm all set to get onto the screens for all you dearest people. Let's welcome Subbu Subramaniam, the Chief Financial Officer from Titan Company. With that, let's also set the screen up for Nilesh Talati, the Chief Financial Officer, Pepperfry. All right, the session would be chaired by Dinesh Arora, the partner and lead deals PwC India. Well, with that, Mr. Arora, I'm all set to hand over the strings of the conversation, the fireside chat, as we call it.
Thank you, Shikha. Welcome to everybody. So we have very eminent panelists, two of our very great companies, very well-known companies, and their CFOs are there to discuss with us on this very, very important topic. So let me start, with some background and context. As everybody knows, nobody expected that we will spend last 1.5 years like this. And now we realize that digitization was not only something which was required for growth, but it is something which is also required or was a must for survival during the last 18 months. So let me start with you. If we can go back in history, what would you have done different in 2019 had you known this thing is coming?
Dinesh, is that for me?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
What would I have done in 2019? Frankly, not much different from what we did. Fortunately, okay. We started our digital transformation journey in 2016, and we thought we were pretty late when we started that journey. And when I talked about digital transformation, this is the business part of it, which is your e-commerce, your omni-channel platform, all of that put together. That we started around 2016. The same year, we also acquired CaratLane. They took the majority stake in that, and so on and so forth. So that's something we realized was very important for our business going forward. And obviously, nobody had an inkling that something like this pandemic is going to hit us sometime in the future, right? And therefore, we thought it was a need to do. Fortunately, as I said, we were prepared when this happened, when the pandemic actually hit us, and therefore we were fine. And the other aspect is, as the business side was one, as a CFO, you also have to try and automate your processes as far as you can. Right, and that was the other thing which happened also around the same time, 2015, with the IFC coming in, a lot more automation focus. So all organizations, I think we were all trying to move into automation in a bigger way. From various aspects, one was control, of course. But importantly, we also realized that it saves time, it improves controls, processes are better, nobody misses out anything, and so on and so forth. So I think that is the other journey which happened from a finance perspective, independent of the digital transformation that the businesses were doing. Now, again, that made sense, because by the time the pandemic actually hit you, you realized that you were fine. You could just work out of home. You had no issues. Nobody had issues, right? You were struggling to go up and down and make, how do you ensure payments are made to people, and you close your books remotely. All of that happened because that platform was fortunately ready. So I think we were fortunate from that perspective that we started it when we started. And therefore, we didn't really see major shocks coming up when the pandemic hit us in 2020. So that's my opening comments on this.
Thank you. Nilesh, you were born in a digital company, at the marketplace. But, if you still had time to go back in 2019, what would you have done differently so that last 18 months would have been different? Yeah.
Sure, Dinesh. I hope this is only a hypothetical question, and none of us wants to go back into 2019. So I'm just joking here. No, I mean, I think you're right. I think a starting point for us is that the business has always been a digitally organized business, and therefore, to the point that Subbu was making, while let us say Titan started 2015, 2016, for us, our origin has always been digital, and that is helpful. Having said that, the fact remains, Dinesh, that as finance professional, we know that it is always our today which is funding our tomorrow. We need to create the resources now so that we can continue to be a successful business for time to come. And what that typically means that as you invest into transformation, as you invest into what my industry likes to call as moonshots, you keep squeezing at the core. It's really how all businesses work out there. You find resources out of your core to fund your transformative journey. And I think while we came out of the whole past period unscathed, there are still a couple of learnings out of it. I think it's important to do salami slicing on the core. But we need to be mindful that we are not, so to say, cutting the pig in that process, isn't it? There is only so much you can take out of the core to fund the future. And I think, if anything, the pandemic has been a bell which has been rung saying that you need to invest on digital capabilities, some things which are have low ROIs. Okay, one more collaborative tool, of course, has a lower ROI. But pandemic made you realize that if you're all going to end up working from home, and in future, if large part of organizations could be potentially on a hybrid model, then maybe that investment in a low ROI collaborative tool is required. So I think one realization is you can't just keep taking things out of core to put behind transformation. There is a level of money which the core requires to keep sustaining the core. So that's, I think, is one lesson in my mind taken out of the pandemic. I think the other lesson I would potentially take out of pandemic is honestly, as CFOs, we all know that there are some projects in the organizations. How do I put it? They are hobby projects. They will only see so much success. And I think occasions like this, which sort of create that churn in the organization, never lose those occasions to sort of get rid of some of these hobby projects. So I think a chaos is the best time to go and do a correction. And I think when I look back at 2019, any organization which didn't grab that opportunity of chaos to correct out some of the hobby sort of projects running in the organization, in my mind, missed out a chance to get themselves better ready for the future. So my sort of two takeaways is invest on transformation, but don't cut the core to the bare bone. You will finally still run on the core, and always use a chaos to set yourself on the right path for the future. Those are my sort of two reflections, Dinesh.
Very well said. I think that was very insightful for both of you. But honestly, if somebody would have asked me what I would have done differently in 2019, I would have said I would have taken more vacations, very well knowing that next month I would not have been able to travel. So, I'm sure both of you would agree with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, so moving on from here, having learned from whatever is the past, and so Nilesh, in terms of, let me start this question with you. In terms of now next 18 to 24 months, you have very well laid out the philosophy of investment. How would you look at future in terms of the core investment, I'm using your parlance, and transformation investment, as you called it, in the digital world, how would you basically prioritize the two? Given, let me put the question that 2020 and first half of 2021 was more about controlling costs, and if the economy is going to grow, we may see 10% growth and lot of industries, which would include probably both of you doing a multiple growth over that. So, to that extent, theme of investment may be different. So how would you differentiate over the next 18 to 24 months in terms of where you are putting your money?
Sure, Dinesh. I think it's a good question, and I think honestly, the way I would think about it is that if anything, there is a significant change in consumer habits happening all around us. It's a big tailwind for the e-commerce sector. We've already seen statistics around us which indicate that the penetration level, the retail penetration of e-commerce has significantly gone up. And I think I don't really want to speak for Subbu, but honestly, I think that trend also applies, let us say, to move from unorganized into organized, which is what a lot of jewelry industry is about. And therefore, whichever way you want to think about it, whether you want to think about it as retail penetration through e-commerce or whether you want to think about shift from unorganized into organized, I think those trends have only set firmer, faster, and better. And that I think is my fundamental outlook to the way the consumer habits are changing. And in my mind, therefore, the crisis actually presents the best opportunity to fasten your digital journey and then make inorganic as a significant component of what you would want to do. So that's my sort of fundamental thesis, that the consumer is changed and that consumer augurs well for organizations which were always poised either as e-commerce organizations or, let us say, fundamentally as organizations which are into organized trade. And therefore, it actually works well for us. It works for branded businesses better. So that's my first hypothesis. My second hypothesis is crisis is the best time to go and find value. And therefore, if inorganic is a part of your strategy, then this is actually the type to go and look out and get aggressive, because you will fundamentally find value out here. And therefore, with those two sort of two premises, I would actually put resources on things which would be far more transformative out here, because this is the time to go and get for yourself a different set of capabilities. I would not chase brand franchisee at this point in time. I think those are the sort of inorganic things that you should normally be doing in the normal course. This is the time to actually go and bolt on capabilities which will set yourself right for the next 5-10 years. So to maybe shed light again from an e-commerce, from a Pepperfry point of view, a big factor of dissonance for the customer is that she has not seen the product. And therefore, are there things that we could do which could blur the line between online and offline for my customer? And that is really where a digital technology comes to play. How can I spin the AR, VR experience so that my consumer, even if she's sitting at home and she's checking a product on pepperfry.com, she has the sense and feeling that she's actually touching that product. Now, there are capabilities already out there, and this is potentially the time to go and figure out how do we sort of bring those capabilities in our house. So to your question, I think the opportunity, this is actually the opportune time. There is great value to be created by finding the right set of organizations. If inorganic is a part of somebody's strategy, gather pace.
So, Subbu, same question to you, that next 18 to 24 months, how are you looking at acquisitions in terms of fueling the growth, or is it going to be primarily organic in terms of both acquisitions and capability acquisitions?
I think Nilesh made very nice points, and I want to amplify that a little more, but not really add too much more into the. So the way we see it, and if we look at our businesses that we are in, right, while we have a digital platform which is in a way available equally to all of our businesses, the way we see customers interact and buy our products is also different across our businesses. For example, if I take the jewelry business, there is significant interaction of the customer digitally to explore the brand and the product. But the customer does not want. Now, in Nilesh's case, it may be difficult for him to do that, but in our case, it's not a problem that we have stores, right? So essentially, what we've seen over the last 1 year, particularly, has been this omni-channel experience. Okay, everybody discovers the product significantly, shortlists it digitally, then calls up the store, fixes an appointment, comes over, finishes the transaction in a fraction of the time that it would otherwise have taken. Okay, otherwise, normally you spend that surfing time entirely in a store. So an average store visit could be an hour to 2 hours. Whereas here, you have contracted that significantly because you've used digital. You've used all of that. There is the endless aisle and all of that, which are today available from our platforms, right? But when it comes to jewelry, and of course we have CaratLane as a brand, which is in a way like Pepper Fry. And CaratLane, yes, our online sale went up substantially last year. Okay, substantially. We have of course brick and mortar also there, but it went up very, very substantially. So it depends on the ticket size. It depends on the customer. A younger customer is not so wary about coming to buying it online, whereas a more mature customer, which is what Tanishq possibly attracts, is somebody who would want to touch, feel, see, be absolutely sure. I think that issue we are still seeing. Come to watches, we very, very different again. Our experience has been very different over the last few years. We started from practically 0 to 14-15% of our total revenue coming only from online. Okay, so watches is picked up very, very well. Again, combination of lower price point. I don't have a problem. I trust the brand, not an issue. So I think it entirely depends on brand to brand. Go to eyewear, it's a very different ball game. While there is AR, VR that Nilesh is talking about, we do have some tools to check power, but they are not as good as the real one. So if you want to check your power and then change your spectacles, you have no option but to go to the store. And that, I think, is how it's going to define for us, depending on our businesses. Now, coming to our own investments, and that digital investment will continue. Yes, whatever we started in 2015-16 is going to continue and maybe in a way accelerate. The one point I want to make here is that every time you look at transformation and you think from a certain core spend that you are incurring, you get into a certain level, you got to realize that level will never come down. It's never transitional. Those are the next bases. Your core becomes that plus the new transformation. Because after that, you have to maintain that level of expenditure and more. So your cost, your investment, I would put it, in digital is something which is not going to fall. It's not a temporary phase. Once you start doing it, you will have to keep chugging along, and that spend actually increases year after year. So that's something that everybody needs to be cautious about. It's not a one-time thing that you put up something and then after that, the scale is going to come down. It doesn't. That's something we all realize. I'm sure digital companies will realize that far more. As far as M&A inorganic is concerned, we did one recent acqui-hire in our tech space. Okay, and yes, we would possibly be looking at those if it makes sense. And we are looking largely at acquisitions for capability, but not necessarily for capacity or geography expansion and so on. We are not looking at that. I think if you look at our brands, the way we are positioned in India, I don't think we may want to do anything more. But capability, I think, is important. So if there is something particularly on the digital side where we think it makes sense, we should be open to that.
So if I heard you correctly, that you are saying your area of sphere is going to be largely, you're not looking at geographic expansion at this point of time, not looking at going to new territories, but from capability perspective, you are certainly looking at, more people to join in and, grow the brand and experience that comes with it.
That's right, Dinesh. Yeah, that's what we should be looking at, because It's not about acquiring brands here. I don't think we need to do it for scale as much as we need to do for capability.
And any product category expansions also, you are, virtually leader in all the categories that you dominate. So are you looking at?
No, there is one category where we really need to look at in a much bigger way. There are a few actually. If you look at our watch business, we call it the watches and wearables business. And wearables today is something which is extremely important. It's getting very prominent. The growth is phenomenal, and it lends itself to a lot of things which we can do very well. So, in a way, let me put it this way: we want to own this real estate, the wrist, right? Watches, and therefore we should. We should be owning that space, and we should therefore have products which customers would want to, explore. And wearables is exploding in a way. I can see that happening as we speak. The pandemic, in a way, is also accelerating that because health has become a very important aspect in everybody's consideration now. Health and wellness. Therefore, ensuring that you're okay. It's not about step counts anymore. It's about heart rate, beats, everything that you're looking at. SpO2 also today. It's as important as that. So therefore, health is a major aspect which is coming into the space, and therefore wearables are becoming very relevant to the customer. The younger customer, I don't think is as enamored as their parents or the previous generation on watches, the traditional watches, whether it's mechanical or so we have to therefore be able to play that space equally well. And that may require some capability and so on, which is what we started with when we acquired the company that we did. So our focus would clearly be in that area. So that's a great area of opportunity. But other than that, if you look at my other businesses and the newer ones, for example, like the sari business, Taneira is an absolutely new business. That is not going to lend itself significantly to digital. Yes, we can. I'm not saying we can't. We have a platform readily available to do that. But again, women like shopping, women like touch and feel when it comes to saris. So it's going to be something that will have to coexist with the brick and mortar significantly. So that's how I put it.
That's absolutely wonderful. So we will see more things coming out of your portfolio. So my next question is, you have clearly laid out what you are looking at in terms of, the targets for acquisition, in terms of capability, in terms of. So clearly, if you were to look at it, how do you do evaluation of such targets in terms of their technological capabilities and resilience? There would be a lot of people in audience who are looking at this as to, how to make themselves more attractive for themselves for investment from both of you. So two questions on their behalf. One is basically, would you look at minority investments? That is what people are going to, and how would you evaluate those? So Nitesh, if we can start with you on this, and then Shubhu can further detail, because this would be a very topical to people.
Sure. So I think if we just sort of reflect on everything which is happening around us today, we actually are seeing very strange collaborations even that was happening, isn't it? I mean, you have car companies which are investing into businesses which are basically tech businesses. You have already seen collaborations between the point that Subbu was making, the line between online and offline is blurring. And therefore you have investments happening between organizations which were either predominantly offline into online businesses or the other way around. So I think the whole sort of consumer space around us is evolving at a pace at which for which the mantra is really not one sort of things, one single sort of application to all problems. And I think therefore when one speaks inorganic today, actually it's an array of options that one could consider. It could be, let us say, 100% to a majority investment, or it could simply be a specific space that the two of you as organizations are jointly going to invest and collaborate around. So it's not even literally investing into each other's businesses. It could just be a niche that you want to jointly bring your capabilities into, and then try and figure out applications and solutions which can then go pan the sort of ecosystem. So let us say when we think about 100% acquisition, then where we are coming from is either that business or that capability is going to be so integral to what Pepperfry does, and that's where we want to have a full control on that one. Contrast that with, to give a live example, there could be, let us say, how do we take our merchandising to the next level? And how do we become best in class when it comes to merchandising? And therefore, we explore 3D modeling on putting furniture online. And when it comes to 3D modeling, the challenge is one of how do you deliver a 3D model on a mobile phone, which could be a very cheap mobile phone. So that's the challenge that you're trying to crack. So it's that when you're trying to crack that specific challenge, you could actually get into a collaborative space with somebody. And that sort of collaboration could dissolve over a period of time, having achieved this sort of co-creation that you wanted to do. So we actually worked with somebody, they bought capabilities on shrinking size of the video which gets remitted. And we got capabilities from Pepperfry around how do you think about merchandising on a high involvement, high engagement categories. The benefits accrued to us at being able to shrink the size of the videos, and the benefit accrued to that organization in terms of having established a proof of technology, which could then be applied across multiple organizations. So the broad point I'm making, Dinesh, here is there isn't really a one solution today to the whole inorganic question. We need to cease thinking of inorganic as just being acquisitions or merger. I think the bigger space is the vast space is actually collaboration. And if we keep our sort of mindset open to that, then the possibilities are immense. That's the way we sort of approach this.
Very well said. Very well said. Subbu, so how are you looking at this? While you alluded to this a lot in the last answer as to what are the sweet spots, etc. But if you were to go more granular on this.
Yeah, I mean, Nilesh makes a point in terms of collaboration rather than necessarily only acquiring. And that's a very valid point. The only point is our own experience. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work.
Yes.
That's where the issue is, okay? And therefore, finally, you may be pushed towards acquiring rather than collaborating. Because the interests of both parties also need to be aligned when it comes to collaboration. And if there is a conflict there, then you have a problem. And that is, I think, where we also went ahead last time. We were collaborating actually on variables to start with, and finally ended up saying, no, it makes sense to actually start acquiring something, at least the internal capability that we were looking for. So I think it's entirely dependent on the case and yours, and what is your requirement, and how much do you need to own that rather than buy it. For example, let me put it this way: if you take a wearables as a category, right? There are certain things that you should definitely have in-house, and we are a company which, if you've seen over the years, we want to be category experts. We just don't want to be trading in anything. Okay, the trading part for us is extremely limited to small things like accessories, where you do you sell belts, wallets, and things like that. But those are very small. If you look at the big businesses, they would require us to be, in a way, category experts. We should know the category inside out, and therefore we actually even go backward into manufacturing. That's generally what we do. We start without the manufacturing part, possibly, but then we move into that. Therefore, when it comes to categories that we want to now explore, we believe we should have very good expertise there. We should have very good knowledge of that business. It doesn't mean you necessarily manufacture, because when it comes to take wearables as a category, there is no way you're going to manufacture, because you're not going to manufacture those sensors and those chips, etc., because China is going to make them for you. Taiwan is going to make them for you, right? Korea is going to make them for you. So that's how it's going to work. But a good insight, customer insight, what sort of design, those are the strengths that we bring in. We know the customer when it comes to watches. Therefore, many of those can be brought into our thought process when it comes to whether you buy or not. So I think that's something that I would look at. It entirely depends on what is it that you want to acquire and why you want to acquire. At the same time, a basic minimum competence in that category would be something important for us. If we don't have that, we would try and do it organically, recruit the right people. That's the best way to do it, because you need to build your team for the long run. And we intrinsically believe in that. We don't intrinsically believe in M&A. We basically believe that we should build our own teams, and that's what we've done all over. But we should be open to acquiring competencies, and this is where you judge what you're buying and who you're going to collaborate with. Because sometimes there are people who want to be independent, who are doing something, and that's the issue. So they are not going to join you as an organization, as an employee. They need to be independent, in which case there is no other option but for you to invest in their business, because you need their skill sets to come into yours. So it's not that straightforward. There's no one answer to this. It's entirely dependent on how you're going.
Very, very insightful.
Just picking up from
Please go ahead.
Sorry, just picking up from the point that Subbu was making. I think I echo the point about there's a point in time when you need to think about in-house grooming and developing of the capabilities. And maybe just to the point that again Subbu made earlier, I think acqui-hire also becomes there for an option. So even as we speak about the various dimensions of inorganic or a various dimension of collaboration, then I think acqui-hire also today stands as something that people, if they're looking to build their business into, could contemplate and think about. I think speaking for our own organization, we could look at potentially, as I said, collaborate with somebody on developing a capability. But more and more, when you start determining that, owning that capability in-house and actually flowering that capability in-house is really when an acqui-hire could come into space. So therefore, to your earlier point, Dinesh, as to what is it that people could position their business for when they're developing their digital business. One could be actually an option could be build up scale, have a POC around a concept that you're working with. If you're able to scale it up independently, fantastic. If not, acqui-hire is always an option out there.
Okay, this was very helpful. My next question is an audience question. It has come from the audience. That how does one monitor and improve the returns on digital investments? Do you really keep track, and how do you keep improving it once you have invested in, the digital assets?
So maybe I'll start this, Nilesh, because you're born digital.
Okay.
I'm not.
Yeah.
No, but I'll tell you, it's a very good question. And when I started this, I remember there was no answer. I didn't have an answer to it. We have to invest. I didn't even look at ROI. Frankly, at that time in 2015 or so, when we took this call to get into our digital transformation, enabling the entire e-commerce, omni, etc., into our businesses, we didn't even think ROI. The reason we said is, this is not about ROI. This is about because we said the customer is moving there. If you're not moving there, then there's something fundamentally wrong with you. The customer will just bypass you. So I think for us, it was about survival, not survival really, but about ensuring that we are securing the future. I think that's where we came from. Having said that, we had a very interesting thing, which during that time, I remember, because the costs were quite heavy. And obviously, I had to debit my divisions, right? And you were going to have problems with the divisions accepting a huge cost in the initial phases of that investment. So what we did is that we had this analytics thing, which we did. Part of our digital transformation was setting up a digital analytics team. We said this team is going to now start selling, getting customers for you, okay, through analytics, entirely through analytics. We have a large database because we have a huge customer loyalty program. It's in millions. So we said we will now be able to target a customer much better digitally. And then what we started doing is we started tracking how much revenue was being generated by this team. Okay. While the entire investment was across the board for various aspects, this was one area where you could actually measure um, how much they were actually contributing to your revenue. Now, once we started doing that, we said we will now put this team as a profit center and they will get a revenue share to defray the expenses in the entire digital. You won't believe it, in 2 years we were there. We were breaking even because that digital team, that analytics team is able to recruit that. And it happened in our case. I'm not sure it'll happen everywhere. But the point was, it's a fantastic ROI. So from that perspective, I don't need to worry about the ROI at all going forward. I know that it will deliver. So sometimes you have to take that leap of faith. In my view, I've got to take that leap of faith. And it depends how critical it is for you. And we thought it was extremely critical at that point in time, that we have to invest in this. So no ROI initially. But later, you realize that you can actually measure it very, very easily. And you will realize that when you put in money like this, it accelerates. And let me tell you one other thing. We were always worried about one aspect here, which was that, and this was actually our goal for 2020 in a way. We said the digital quotient in our company, because it's a brick and mortar company, was generally quite low. Okay. People think this is one IT function, some guy sitting there digitally doing something, coming out with some analytics and coming and giving us some solutions. That's what was the idea. And the rest of it, we said we need to actually educate our people over the next 1 or 2 years. This is what we were thinking. But when the pandemic hit us, what surprised us was people just caught on to technology so easily. At the store level, people started using their phones and started using everything that the phone could do to start reaching out to a customer. And then, of course, there was the entire technology platform that we had. So video conferencing became the way to do things. So the point I'm making is also that certain things are also intuitive. And we actually were worried that we have to get that digital quotient up in a brick and mortar company. Let's not forget the average experience in a company like ours would be 15 to 20 years. Older than the Pepperfry itself, right? That's the average experience of a company. And therefore, you can see where they're coming from. But the adaptation or the way they took into digital so quickly and so seamlessly last year was a phenomenal eye-opener. And therefore, the investment here, I don't think you should really look at ROI so much as take that leap of faith and say, this is good for your business. If you think it's, go ahead, make that investment.
Nilesh, would you like to throw some more light on this? How do you do in your company, monitor and improve ROIs on?
I'll sort of put my response around some of the things that Subbu also said, so that we just can connect the whole piece around this. So I think I echo what Subbu said. There is number one, there is no option but to be on the digital journey today. It doesn't matter whether your origin as Pepperfry was a digital company or your origin, let us say, as Titan was a non-digital company. But whichever way you originated, I think there is absolutely no choice today but to be digitally there. I think your technology advantage at best can be a couple of years, and this is something that everybody ought to be conscious about. There is no lasting technology advantage today. You can, if you do well, you will have it for a couple of years. Be on your toes so that you can keep rolling it forward again for another couple of years. But with the way technology is evolving, this investment is given to the point that Subbu also made earlier. You will only keep increasing the spend. And the reason you will keep increasing the spend is because there is no lasting technology advantage. You'll have to keep refreshing what you're doing. You have to keep relearning what you're doing. And that, I think, is an important factor. So don't think of your ROI as, I spend money today, I'll get returns in annuity form over the next 5 years, and then there'll be a terminal value. DCF doesn't work here. You will spend today, you will spend tomorrow, and you will just keep hopefully expanding your competitive advantage, and that's the way your returns will come. So that's be purely from the thought process as to how do you approach it. I think having said this, there are some fantastic gains on the digital side. Let me just use one example out here. I spent a long time as in my career working with Hindustan Lever, Unilever, FMCG business, and I remember our ex-chairman very wisely saying, we spend 6 billion euros on advertising. I know half of it works. I just don't know which half works. Okay, I think that's the problem with analog spends, okay, as compared to digital, that we make a lot of assumptions on ROIs in the analog world. In the digital world, everything can be tracked. Okay, you go and spend 100 rupees on Facebook, and you can go down and pinpoint where did you spend that money, which is the customer you reached, did that customer come your way, didn't come that your way, how much did that customer buy from you, when did the customer again repeat to you. And therefore, I think let's also look at the merits of digital spend, that your traceability goes up by a factor of 1,000. Okay, and therefore you should actually be able to literally micromanage your ROI. And that's a big gift out of digital. Okay, therefore, be conscious about it. I think the last point I'll make out here is there is no absolute right. Okay, we all build business cases. We all rely on all data around us, and then we bring our judgment to the table, and then things still unfortunately go wrong. Okay, again, the advantage in the digital world is you're able to measure sooner, faster, and therefore you're able to correct sooner, faster. And therefore, when you think ROI, I would also suggest think flexibly. Okay, don't be wedded to a point of view just because 3 months back, 6 months back, 8 months back, we thought that was the right direction to take. Measure quickly, learn fast. If something is not working, don't be emotionally attached, backtrack. So those would be my sort of thoughts around it. I think it is a spend to be had. It is a spend which is far better measurable, and therefore just the quality of decision making can be phenomenally better as compared to some of the, so to say, non-digital analog decisions.
I think so. If I have to summarize for the audience, what Nilesh and Subbu said was that you don't have an option; you have to invest. So don't get into analysis paralysis of looking at complicated spreadsheets whether we should make this investment or not. Just make the investment and learn from them and keep on improving with them. The other part was, yes, some of it will go wrong. So the idea is to make as many mistakes and learn from them and move on, and move up the learning curve in a very steep way. So this was the message for all of you from both of them. My next question is, I think Nilesh, you ended with something like speed of decision making, and this has again come from the audience that with all this data coming along, how do we basically increase the speed of decision making, and how does it impact both the top line or bottom line, or does it lead to some kind of a paralysis when you have so much of data? Any of you who can start on this.
Okay, I'll go for Subbu if you're fine. I think it's a problem with data, isn't it? I mean, how much data is enough is a fundamental question for everything around us. And indeed, today there is an explosion of information around us. I remember 5 years back, big data was a phenomenal big sort of buzz around the industry, and everybody spoke about big data and what we could do with big data. So honestly, I think it's a good question because it literally comes down to what is the right level of information that we need to make decisions. And I think there is honestly no one answer for that. My point of view on this one would be, what are you making with that data? If you're using your data to get more predictive, more forward-looking, if you're able to adjust your data so that you're able to spot trends, then I think you'll find success there. If you're collecting a lot of data to explain what didn't work, then honestly, you're wasting time. Okay. If you're taking learnings out of what didn't work, I think it is still fine. But my sort of point of view on this one would be every organization would need to determine the quantum of data that they want to look at, because there is just too much honestly available out there. But the important point is not about just the quantum of data. The important point is what are you doing with it. I think the capabilities which are available today can make you far more forward looking. Just sort of two other tools which could help, if I could reflect on the question again. There are tools available today which substitute human intelligence, and therefore the tools are, you call them machine learning, you call them AI, whatever you want to think about it. But there are tools which are able to spot trends for you. And there is a lot of those tools available in the market. If you actually have a huge amount of data, my suggestion would be look up some of those tools. And the B side of tools, I think, which are very handy, especially when you are looking to present data to more senior management, are visualizing tools, because then you take out a lot of minutiae details and you are able to tell your story in a way in which typically people with small attention span are able to grasp your inputs and help you make decisions. So a lot of data, look forward, a lot of tools available to help you get predictive, and a lot of tools available to help you visualize things, which actually helps you tell your story better.
Subbu, from your side?
Yeah, I think there is one thing which I also want to talk about, in the sense that while, as I mentioned earlier, digital transformation for us was not an option, okay, and ROI was not something which I would even consider calculating and so on. I should also point out that there is also this major fear of missing out. And when you meet more and more sales guys from any of the tech companies, they will come and tell you, I just gave Nilesh's point on big data. How much we used to think about what big data can do for us. Okay, let us also understand many of them could just be hype. It could, or at least the promise may be much more than what it finally delivers, and you may be actually disappointed that the delivery is not much. So my view on this, therefore, is while some technologies can be extremely exciting, okay, when they are thrown about to you, I would think you get your basics first, so that, and then learn as you go along. You also would want to, invest not irrationally, because many of them actually end up just being that hype, not really delivering to the extent that you can. And finally, you end up only using certain tools which are part of that overall suite which was given to you. Others we just don't use because, and of course, it's also about educating your own people. And what Nilesh was talking about, can I use it for predicting? Okay, that also requires a certain ability from your own team to be able to use those tools to be able to predict. If you don't use them adequately enough, which means that you need the capability, the people who can also do this for you. But the point is that some aspects of this also will be high, and the fear of missing out is very, very high when it comes to technology, because somebody else you think is doing it and you're not doing it. I think you need to balance both. You need to be clearly invested, but maybe you don't need to overdo it.
No, I think the world is getting more complex, and I think two takeaways from me from what both of you said is that we are going to have more and more data, so we have to use data judiciously to take decisions, and also now forward-looking data is available, so that makes things more complex for all of us in the world. And personally, I think 10 years ago, all employees had only three things in their KPI sheet, which was sales oriented, which was revenue, profitability, and receivables. Now, because more data is available, even evaluation of people has become very difficult, because you have got so many KPIs to meet because there is so much of data available. So clearly, it is going to be data-driven world, not only for CFOs, but all it is going to be probably across the organizations. But the good thing is, as it was pointed out, that we have got advanced tools available. You've got machine learning available and artificial intelligence available to evaluate things and to look at things. But clearly, once these tools are made available to us, we still have to use common sense to evaluate the data, because these machines are not going to do everything for us. At least they are not at a stage. And whenever I have seen people not using the common sense, the results from artificial intelligence don't match up. So that would be my take from learning from both of you, that we have to adapt the new tools, and data is going to be all pervasive and all this thing going forward also. So I think we have time for one last question, I would say, the way we are going. So if we have to basically, what is the latest breakthrough for CFOs across, and this is again an audience question, what is the latest breakthrough for CFOs across the country in 2021? What does the post-pandemic market hold for the CFOs in finance function? So basically, what is one piece of advice you would give to CFOs which will help them do their function better?
Nilesh, you want to go?
Now that
Subbu, over to you. Maybe you go first.
No, I think what 2020 has taught us is a lot of things. I think it's been an amazing learning experience for all of us. First thing is you're starting to plan more. You're starting to plan more with uncertainty, which is the biggest thing. And we've been talking VUCA for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I don't know. When it actually hit you, nobody was prepared, right? And then suddenly you are actually in the deep end of the pool, and you are said, now let's swim. You find out how you're going to do this, how you're going to navigate. So it was a phenomenal experience. I'm sure every CFO has learned tremendously. One is start doing scenario planning, right? Different, see how is it going to work for you. Look at cash, extremely important. You realize the importance of cash at that point more than any time else. So ensure that you're always going to be liquid, because you never know when the next lockdown is going to happen, and then how your business is going to get impacted. Look at costs in a very big way. And one of the common themes last year, I remember in many discussions I've had, is how do you make your fixed costs as variable as possible? Can you move as many of those fixed costs into variable costs, so that when your revenues don't stack up, then you are not burdened by heavy fixed costs. So I think a lot of these learnings, I'm sure every organization has learned during this whole period. Negotiations, I mean, we have gone, and it's both ways. We have squeezed others, we've also helped others, right? We've done maybe negotiated a lot on rentals and got them down during the initial phase. Interestingly, this year we're not doing that, because we know that they're also getting hurt. So we are actually not doing that. A lot of empathy towards our franchisees, our vendors, etc. So we have gone ahead and lent money to them so that they survive. So it's about sustainable business practices. So it's been in a way a crash course in every one of these aspects that we have experienced in the last 1 year. So whoever has been a CFO in the last 1 year, I mean, they are damn lucky. That's what I say.
So I'll just build on what Subbu said, and let me then take the other side, so to say, of the P&L or of the balance sheet. I think it is definitely not just in Pepperfry. I think most organizations today are seeing a lot of opportunities. We all think and believe, and we have reasons to think and believe the consumer is changed. We all believe that post the pandemic, demand level should go up. And therefore, whichever organization that I speak with today see a lot of opportunity as things start opening up and as we sort of push this phase behind us. And honestly, I think the CFO's role becomes far more meaningful when there are multiple opportunities which are competing for resources. So my sort of one piece would be get far closer to the business, uh, uh, judge the opportunities on their merit, and work closely with the CEO, with the business team. The businesses, I mean, when was the last time you've seen 10-15% fiscal deficit? There is so much investment that the government is making. There is all reason to think that businesses should grow, and therefore be the person who is going to navigate your organization, because the opportunities are large, the resources will always be limited, and that's where a CFO's should shine. That's your job. You should shine there. So that's one piece I would sort of say from my side. I think the other piece, which is topical to the theme out here, M&As are very sexy. They're very glorious. Few of them pay back. Again, it is for the CFO to hold the balance in the hand and apply judgment on what's going to work, what's not going to work. So to the point that Subbu called out earlier, let FOMO not impact you. Make judicious decisions, because again, the opportunities are big. There's a lot of value available there. Don't get carried away by newspaper headlines. Look at the substance of what you're going to acquire. So yeah, I think great opportunities coming everybody's way. Businesses should do well. CFO is the star at this point in time. You're going to navigate the organization.
Thank you. This was very informative. I think key messages are cash is king. Cash was always the king. Cash will remain the king. That's what Subbu started with. So please, do it bold, underline, italics, whatever you are. Other part was that, you have to be compassionate and sustainable. You can't, cut corners everywhere so that supply chains exist. As Nilesh said, you have to be very flexible, right? In terms of the way the world is moving, it is very dynamic. And as a living, I do M&A for people. So Nilesh, I would request you to consider that, we will make sure that more than 50% of them succeed for you. Yeah. So, M&As are an opportunity. And then as Nilesh pointed out, we have to be cautious, cautiously optimistic in this world, if I have to describe that word, that there are opportunities, but be cautious about them. This was a very, very insightful session, very informative. There are a lot of things to learn for me also, and I'm sure the audience would have gathered a lot from you. So, Ishika, if you want to come in and say something on the closing.
Well, thank you. I think the acceptance of information and technology, if we talk about, is critical. This is something that has never been felt in a greater force than today. So thank you very much, accomplished speakers, and thank you, Mr. Arora, for those perspectives that reaffirm. Well, not to mention that we did enjoy the wit and bonhomie that accompanied the discussion. So thank you. Have a good rest of the day. And with that, ladies and gents, I'm going to be saying that Hitachi Vantara, Commvault, and Tata Communications, I would appreciate if you would visit these partner booths, because they have something experiential to showcase to you. They also have their designated feedback forms that you are supposed to fill to get those points, right? I am on your side. I want you to make the best use of everything that's existing in terms of the booths, visiting them, and of course, filling the feedback forms, because that's something that gets you the points. So let those energies be intact. Be competitive to climb up that leaderboard. Don't forget about the Amazon gift vouchers that could be yours. All right. So with that, avail opportunity of also the one-to-one meetings, then networking with your colleagues. I think, conferences such as these give you that opportunity. It's not every day that we experience something like this, right? So Hashtag ETDataCon is the official hashtag that I would want all of you to use to, express that excitement on social media. It is so critical what we are talking about with respect to the role of CFOs and how we are perceiving the future. So keep that all coming in. If you're still not able to figure out what's the social wall, of course, it showcases what your other peers and friends, industry colleagues are tweeting and putting out there. So you can read their interesting comments. It's just a way of interaction. Yes, that's one. Photo booth is important because there you can pose yourself and use those same pictures along with your comments and put it out there on social media. The signature wall is something that's just a live feature where you can see each other's comments, whatever you want to talk about and, indicate about the platform, the sessions, the speakers. You can just put it out there. Keep visiting the leaderboard to check your scores. Briefcase are the resources that are reserved for your good, knowledgeable use, right? Digital certificates, I'm sure everybody has downloaded by now, so I'll be relaxed on that bit. Okay, now it's time now to make an honest confession, which is that I sneaked out of the plenary session for a bit, and I clicked on the take a break tab and completed my car rush game, and I am feeling good about it. So let the goodness resume, but with the conversation now. I would have 3 gentlemen joining me. Dun, 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 it's gonna be a trialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, please visit the booths in the meanwhile while I just get them onto the screen. I'll be right back.